everyone. Glad to see that we're all here and alive after last night. I know I had a great time. I hope you guys did too. I'm here to talk about the state of Eve's lore, the state of the backstory. For those of you who may not know who I am, I'm Mark726 in-game. I write a blog called Eve Travel. It's a blog dedicated to going around cataloging all the various landmarks in New Eden. You know, we had the Titan and Luminaire before it got shot down, a few other, the Steve wreck out in C9N. So I fly around the cluster and I talk about the sites that are out there because a few years back I realized that there was nothing, no real comprehensive list because I got bored one day and I wanted to go flying, and I realized there was no comprehensive list, so I decided I would put one together myself. In the process of that, I got myself really involved in the game's backstory. I needed to in order to really talk about a lot of the sites that I was seeing. So I ended up actually writing what I call the Eve Lore Survival Guide. I don't know if any of you have really tried to dig into the lore, but it's difficult to do. You know, you're spread across somewhere over 100 different chronicles, massive Evelopedia at this point, and not to mention 3 books and a few other scattered lore entries, and there was no real easy way to dig into it. So what I did was I tried my best to put one together myself. Turned out it was supposed to start as a brief blog entry for my friend Seismic Stan over at Freebooted. Ended up being somewhere around 30,000 words, 60 pages at this point, and still going strong whenever they do some massive updates. So yeah, that's kind of how I know what I'm talking about here, at least I like to think so. On Twitter, I'm at WebSpaceships. I'm very active on the tweet fleet. If you ever want to hit me up on there, ask me any questions, I'm always happy to talk about this. So I thought since this was a goon convention to originally start out with, I should probably talk about why we should even care about the lore a bit. I know a lot of people, and CCP loves to play up, you know, the player-driven sandbox. You see the Battle of Asakai, you see the battle, or you see the Fountain War. So why should we care about the game's backstory when, you know, everything is all about what the players do? There's a few reasons for that, actually. First off, it's just a cool story. CCP has put, and I don't know how many people really realize this, CCP has put a ton of effort into this game, into the game's backstory. If you ever dig into the Evelopedia a bit, you know, they have 2 full separate wiki entries on, for some reason, Caldari financial and retirement systems. Never quite figured out why it's there, but I love that it is. You know, it just shows that kind of dedication that CCP puts into this game. Not only that, however, you know, we're here to talk about spaceships. I know I joined originally not really knowing what Eve was about, to fly spaceships. I wanted to do, before I knew anything about, you know, the backstabbing, the blackmail, I wanted to fly spaceships, and I saw the ad, and I dug in from there, and I'm sure that's why a number of you joined as well. So, you know, we should have this setting. It's not just spreadsheets in space, regardless of how many times we try to think that it is. So, you know, we could all be flying, you know, Caldari Cruiser 5 as opposed to the Caracal. But the fact that we have this backstory really gives it that extra oomph of realism that doesn't just go to the realism that the players bring into this game, but it helps it make more complete. There was a few blogs back in August talking about what CCP can do for the lore, and I apologize for getting who said this, but someone said that the lore is what binds together. It's the mortar of EVE Online. The player stories are the bricks, but there's something that needs to hold it together, or else we're just going to have, you know, generic massive spaceships or, you know, submarines in space that are just that don't do anything. It's less realistic without the lore. So I think that that's why, one of the reasons that we should be caring about this. And, you know, shameless plug alert, I wouldn't be a blogger if I didn't do this. Again, feel free to download the lore guide if you want to see just how realistic this lore gets, you know. They do a backstory spanning 20,000 years, and players are only really starting to dig into it now. Hold on here. So one of the last things I want to talk about, though, is just to demonstrate what kind of depth we are talking about here. A week or two ago, my friend Ravas at Interstellar Privateer wrote a fascinating story on the new Sisters of Eve cruisers, which I am really excited about, by the way, as an explorer. And he dug into the background of the names. You wouldn't think that the names would mean much. You know, you have a caracal, you have a drake. Caldari tends to go after birds, Galente tend to go after whatever Galente go after. Amar are all about theocracy. But they put a lot of thought into these names. Let's start with the Sisters of Eve cruiser, the Stratios. The name invokes, first and foremost, the word stratum, layer. CCP is yelling at us right here that they are taught that there are layers to these names, that there is a background here. They're trying to tell a story. So, and not only that, however, but when you dig into it a little bit more, it refers to Stratios, which was a person in Greek mythology that led animals to sacrifice. Now, hopefully the Sisters of Eve aren't really prepping us to do that. But you know what? That's just another layer of warning to us if we're there to look for it. Next up, we have the Astero. If you take a look at the name again, it obviously refers to the word astro, star. But it's also a biological term. Asters form during the process of cell division. It's one of the structures that pop up during mitosis. Sisters of Eve ships are probably going to be used heavily in wormhole space. The lore name for wormhole space, and I didn't know this before I started reading Ravas, is anoikos, which refers to a specific type of cell death. So on the one hand, we have Aster talking about cell creation, going into anoikos, battling anoikos, talking about cell death. You have a great dichotomy that we have forming here. And it just goes to show what kind of depth and what kind of game that we are dealing with here. Not only that, however, but CCP also puts in, or CCP has told us numerous times that there is more for us to discover. Back in May 7, 2010, it may not make sense at first. If you go through wormhole space, you're going to find a lot of, at the sleeper sites, it's not just sleepers that blow you up. Look at the structure descriptions. Look at the ship descriptions. You're going to see quarantine sites. You're going to see Talican structures for some reason. And CCP has told us over and over and over again that if we just work together, we'll be able to solve what they're trying to say here. There is a story here to be told. We just don't know it yet. And that's what CCP is trying to do with the lore here. We're all telling the story, not just the story of the big fleet battles, the 4,000 people in Asakai. We're telling the story of the game. And I think that is absolutely fascinating. It's a collective, story-driven effort. CCP may know the final answers. CCP may know what the heck the Talican are doing in Anoikis. They may know what the quarantine sites are referring to, but they don't know how we are going to find it. There was an effort a few years ago called Eric Jalan, which involved over 1,000 pilots that were purely dedicated to in-game research of the lore. I helped work on it trying to figure out where wormhole space is in relation to New Eden. But it's those kind of player-driven efforts, thousands of people helping to tell this story, thousands of people not just flying in space and blowing each other up, but working together to fill in the game, to make the game even more real than it really is. So the bottom line here, there's more out there that we can do. There is more out there to discover, and I'm really excited to see where we're going to go with it. We still have plenty of secrets that we need to discover. We need to figure out where wormholes came from. We need to figure out what the sleepers have to do with the quarantine. What happened to the Jove? I don't know, do you? We have to figure out, if you read some of the chronicles, there's been a number of references that the fact Dust 514 has a very specific meaning in game that hasn't really come out yet. So there's a tie-in here not only to Dust, obviously, but just to the universe in general. There is still more that CCP is waiting for us to discover so we can tell them, so we can add to that story and, among other things, make my life easier in growing the lore guide. So now that I hopefully have talked a little bit about the storyline and why we should try to care about it. Where are we right now? The CCP storyline right now is we are in the midst of a bit of a transition. And you can see this, among other things, they are doing a vast expansion of the Evilopedia update. They are growing out all the Empire backstories. The Amar backstory, for example, used to be maybe 2 pages in length before they came out with the updates. It is now currently sitting at, I think, 5 different wiki entries of probably 7 pages apiece. And they're just telling the backstory. It dates all the way back to the collapse of the Eve Gate and will walk you step by step by step, year by year, it seems, at some points, telling the story of how the Amar started, why they have a lot of, why they're very proud of themselves and seem to name everything they ever conquer after themselves, and how they got to where they are today. We see where the Empress came from. We see how the houses came to be. They did the same thing with the Galente as well. They really dove into that backstory a lot as well. We're still waiting on the Minmatar updates. We are still waiting on the Caldari updates, but they are very much expanding the storyline. This is an active and ongoing effort. Not only that, but we're seeing a lot more live events now, which I'm always thrilled about. The most well-known one is probably the takedown of the Titan in Galente Prime, the Shigeru. Excuse me, Caldari Prime in Luminaire, you're right. But that's just one example of the live events that we're starting to see up. You know, the Minmatar recently reformed their tribal parliament, and there was a live event for ships to escort some of the delegates to Pator to make sure that they arrive safely. We're seeing more Minmatar fleets, as I just said. And we're not only seeing Pew Pew, however. We're seeing they're also starting to branch out a little bit into non-combat live events. I don't know how many of you participated here in the Sanctuary, which is again Sisters of Eve, contest of images. They wanted you to profile, I think ended up being 30 different areas of Eve, which worked right up my alley, as you can imagine. But you know, it didn't involve any combat. It could have if you made a wrong turn in nullsec or you just had some bad luck. But there was a lot of exploration to be done there, a lot of pictures. I think I read that around 5,000 pilots did the first round or something like that. I could be wrong on that. But we're dealing with a lot more expressive live events that just don't involve blowing things up. We're also seeing the dev fleets. You may not think that the dev fleets are really a live event, but it's the game developers telling the story here. You're seeing the devs leave Polaris, and there's always a nice little Twitter update or news update as well about this. And they're interacting, they're coming out of their little hidey holes in Polaris and coming out to attack players. Sometimes it fits into the storyline, sometimes it doesn't. We do our best to see what they're going to do with it. We just play it by ear, but I've never made it to one, unfortunately, but I hear that they're a ton of fun. They love to drop goodies, and they love to, you know, be their overpowered dev hacks, because, as we all know, devs don't actually play Eve. But where is the storyline sitting right now, actually? Right now, the Caldari are probably the main storyline right here. This guy is Tybus Heth. He used to be the leader of the Caldari state. He was trying to centralize some power. The megacorporations that generally are used to running the Caldari state didn't really like that too much after a while. They ended up, once the Caldari Titan in Caldari Prime got taken down and it was revealed that Heth had done some shenanigans in terms of making the admiral who had flown that ship commit a ritualistic suicide, the Caldari being a cheery bunch that they are, he got thrown from power. The megacorporations reasserted themselves. And now Tybus Heth, last we know of, was hiding out somewhere in Black Rise with a few of his supporters. And as of Friday, it looks like that he has been kidnapped yet again by someone else. So that storyline is very much still evolving. Other than that, we have the rising tensions between the Galente and the Minmatar. There's been a number of things, starting with back when the former prime minister of the Minmatar Karen Migelar, was assassinated at a cultural event in Galente space. Minmatar ended up getting pissed at the Galente because the Galente refused to extradite the prisoner before trying him. That was the start of tensions, and things have only seemed to escalate from there. You're seeing a number of news events now regarding discrimination that Minmatar are feeling in Galente space, despite the fact that they're supposed to be BFFs with each other. So you're seeing this growing tension. And it's growing that way just in general. You see the Amar becoming more warlike. The Amar are, you haven't been seeing a lot of news sites or news stories about it, but a few calls for them to resume full-fledged war against the Republic. I don't really know what they think faction warfare is, to be fair, but you do see that this kind of stuff is coming up. So we have a few storylines that we have going on here. And if you would ask me where the storyline was going until even a few weeks ago, I would have said it seems to be taking a more terrestrial concern. You're seeing a lot of human drama in the storyline these days. You're seeing, leaders bumping up against each other. You're seeing politics. You're not seeing the hard sci-fi these days that we used to see with the release of Apocrypha, where we had, this mysterious Isogen 5 that just started blowing up all over the place, sending stars that end up creating these shattered planets. The storylines we're seeing these days are mostly things that don't necessarily have to take place in sci-fi. They could be taking place in any fantasy setting. They could be taking place in, altered worlds of any kind. It's politics. It's human drama. But then the Sisters of Eve ships came out. And what that let me know, as we just discussed earlier, CCP still does have that storyline. They want to see, or they still have an idea in mind of where they want to go and what they want the background to say. They have these storylines in mind, even if they seem to be focusing more on the terrestrial concerns, as I've been calling them. You also see a little bit of a clearing out of the old status quo. As I said, Tibus Heth has been around since Tyrannus, something like that. He's been around for a while. You have Empress Jamil coming in, and she seems to be quieting down a little bit. You seem to be clearing out a little bit of the old status quo. We're getting not just Caldari versus Galente, you're getting Minmatar versus Galente now. We're seeing more tensions pop up, changing up the storyline. You're seeing, this is all stuff I've said already. So so we are seeing not just this terrestrial concern though, but there is, as the Sisters of Eve ships demonstrate, a deeper storyline out there that CCP hasn't revealed to us yet. So what are the kind of things that are left here to discover? We talked about this a little bit earlier. Sleepers into Noicus. It's a fascinating subject for any of you who have delved into it. There seems to be some kind of quarantine in effect for all the sleepers in there. We don't know why. They were doing bio-research for some reason. And we don't know why the sleepers are attacking us. Templar 1 delves into their backstory a lot, but still leaves a lot of unanswered questions. Not only that, we have a number of things to clear up with rogue drones. Where they come from, what is their ultimate end goal? Why were they working with, who were they? They were working with someone that I'm blanking on right now, unfortunately. But, they were working together they seem to be involved with the Isogen 5 effort, excuse me. So how did they get involved? Why did they get involved? We thought that they were just these semi-sentient drones who hang out in the drone lands. They're not. They're involved here. We just don't know how yet. The Sancha. Why does he keep invading and why does no one seem to care about that? You'd think he would have figured it out by now that it's not working out too well for him. But more importantly, how does he tie in with the Jove? When the incursions first came out, they were doing a number of live events where Sancho would dive into K-space and abduct planets. They had this wormhole generator that could create a wormhole from wherever they were hiding and jump into any system they wanted. We don't know where they got that wormhole technology. We don't know what they're doing with it now. Not only that, but towards the end of the storyline, one of the players actually managed to get a probe through one of the wormholes that the Jove are using. What they saw, or the Sancho were using. What they saw on the other side was a massive Sancha fleet next to a Jove station. For at least a little while, they were basing themselves out of Jove space. We don't know if that means that the Jove are teaming up with them. We don't know if the Jove just don't care. We don't know if the Jove still exist anymore. That is definitely one of the stories that we need to get through. Last but not least, we have the Infomorph. I don't know how many of you remember this happy character. She popped up a little while during one of the Sleeper storylines. It's been pretty heavily implied that this is something that comes out of the Sleeper Matrix. It's an artificial intelligence that was born in an artificial construct. I won't bore you all with the details, but feel free to ask me about that later if you like. But we don't know, we haven't heard from it since. It popped up a few times 2 years ago now. We don't know what happened to it. I think it's tied into my personal pet project of what the mysterious shuttle in Geztik is doing here. Again, it's just a shuttle flying around a beacon in Geztik. We don't know what it is. There's a human sleeping and cryostasis in it. We know nothing else about it. Popped up around the same time that, at least I noticed it around the same time that the Infomorph started popping up. So we'll see what happens with that. So as I said, there's still a number of hanging storylines here. And then, of course, there's Dust 514 as well. We don't know a lot about what, and again, Templar 1 does dive into this quite a bit, but we don't know what the ultimate end goal was. We know that there were some problems with the earlier versions of the clone troopers. They were hearing 514 over and over again. The original clone soldiers would black out for a little while, and when they came back to, someone had scrawled 514 on in blood on a wall nearby. We don't know what it means. So you might be asking at this point, with the state of the storyline as it is, what am I looking for? An Eve geek in a spaceship store, so to speak. What would be my dream list of where to go? I'd like to see more player-driven storylines. I know a number of people have called for the live events to have a less certain outcome. That what would have happened, for example, if somehow the Gallente never managed to take down the Caldari Prime Titan? Would the Gallente have, retreated on their hind legs and ran back to Gallente Prime? Would Tybus Heth have gone even more power-hungry and just grabbed everything? We don't know. It would have been cool to find out. I understand why CCP doesn't do it to an extent. They have an idea of where the storyline wants to go. I see that. But branching plot points would be fantastic, I think. And I know a number of people out there agree with me. I've seen enough blog entries on it. I'd also like to see a return of, not necessarily Eric Jalan, excuse me, but I would like to see those kind of player-driven efforts again. Again, it doesn't have to be about the pew-pew. It can be about doing just generic research. During the Eric Jalan storyline, players worked together and brought in somewhere around 5 billion ISK worth of material to build an Eric Jalan site in Aram. There was a centralized research center that you can visit to this day. Feel free to check out my blog about it to shamelessly promote myself again. But they go over the various research projects in Aram that players had worked on. And it's just a fantastic site. It shows, the living, the changing storyline. I'd like to see more live events in general. Again, I know CCP is working hard. Their lore team is very much trying to get their feet wet again on this. The live events died out for a little while after the Summer of Rage and the company reshuffling. They are starting to reassert themselves, though, and I would just love to see more live events out of this, more storyline. Again, it doesn't have to be pew-pew based, but I'm sure most of you won't say no to pew-pew, even if you're just there to shoot anyone and everyone, regardless. Ripper Teg, who is probably on his 5th blog entry since entering Vegas at this point, brought up an interesting idea a few months ago to revamp the mission system. In general, I know that a lot of people would like to see this. How many times is that damsel going to get stuck in that prostitution hub? Some new missions to tie better into the storyline. A lot of the generic missions that you see have absolutely nothing to do with the broader story arc of Eve. You could be rescuing an orc princess in the evil game that we don't speak of. So as much as the damsel in distress storyline ties into this game. So I'd like to see a revamp of the mission system to make the lore more immediate. Missions are one of the first things that most players will do in EVE. And seeing the lore come alive that way would be a fantastic step. How about make it, so if you're in a Galente starter area, you have to do something to promote Federation values or something to that effect. I don't know. But tying it more into the game would be fantastic. They're doing a good job with that with the Epic Arcs. I will be completely honest here. The Sisters of Eve storyline in particular does a great job of introducing all of the initial empires and giving a feel for each of them. But I'd like to see them build on that. A revamp of the mission systems in general I think is sorely needed. And a while ago, we were promised, actually, and I think this would be a fantastic idea as well, a tie-in to the Evelopedia. There was talk for a while that you would be able to click on any object, be taken to the lore entry in the Wikipedia, or in the Evelopedia, to talk about and learn more in depth about these different things. I'd love to see this implemented. Again, it's more tying the storyline in together and seeing where we go. They have done, and I don't mean to criticize CCP too much here. They've done a number of things right here. I love the fact that we've been seeing more storyline news items this year than we've seen in any year in the past, if you look at the news updates. They're pushing out some there's sometimes 2 or 3 storylines or news items a day, or 4 or 5 a week. I'm loving this. I love to see this kind of stuff come. And it's on both mundane things and exciting things. You might see, a stock update for one of the Caldari megacorporations. Or you'll see the breaking news about what happened with when Midgelar died, when Prime Minister Midgelar got killed. And as we were talking about earlier, I'd love to see more of they're doing a great job with these wiki updates. The expansion that they're doing in the storyline is absolutely fantastic. And I want to see more of it. I want them to finish off the Caldari. I want them to finish off the Minmatar. I have a sneaking suspicion that they're waiting for things to settle down in both. The Caldari, as I said, just booted out Heth and kind of reestablishing the megacorporations as the primary guides here. In the Minmatar, you have Sanmatar Shakor kicking out the old Republic Parliament and putting in a tribal parliament, not to mention that they're trying to reintegrate the Nefantar tribe and the Stark Manir tribe as well, 2 of the 7 tribes of Pator or Matar that people had thought were either exiled forever or extinct. So I suspect that they're waiting for those storylines to kind of come to fruition before we see those full-fledged wiki updates like I was talking about with the Amar and Galente. But I would like to, but they are doing a fantastic job with what they've put out so far. And they have a fantastic lore team. You have eTurn, CCP eTurn, CCP Abraxas, CCP Naughton. They're fantastic. They know this stuff backwards and forwards, more than any player out there, really. They know what they're talking about. They're happy to engage. You see them interacting with role players a lot. I cannot say enough good things about the lore team. As small as it is these days, they are doing a fantastic job with it. And while I was saying that the storylines are more terrestrial these days, they're also a lot more relatable. People may not understand what Isogen 5 is and why we're having planets blow up, outside of the fact that it looks cool. But you can understand politics. You can understand intrigue a lot better. So they're bringing the storyline down a little bit from its kind of full-fledged heights that we saw around Apocrypha. Not to mention that I'm really excited about to see what they have in the EVE source book. It's supposed to be coming out, I think, at the end of this year, from what I heard. And it's going to be an EVE compendium of all the lore. They're putting it all together for you and possibly kicking me out of business, but I'll take what I can get here. I'm really excited to see what they're doing with this and what's going to be in there. You see a number of the other big games. Dragon Age has a similar thing. Mass Effect has a similar thing, where it's just all the lore in one place. And I love that CCP is doing the same thing for EVE. So, last but not least, what's next for the storyline? AKA complete and wild speculation. I would not be surprised, and I cannot promise that after this segment is done, all of the lore team is going to be taking to Twitter saying that I am full of BS and I can't be trusted or whatnot. So complete speculation here. I think we're going to see more of this inter-empire tensions right now. It's building up with the Gallente and Minmatar, who used to be very, very close allies. I suspect we might start seeing some hints of that as well between the Amar and Caldari. The interesting thing about the Amar and Caldari is that they're not necessarily all that friendly with each other. It's more of an enemy is my friend situation with them. The Gallente and Minmatar very much actually like each other. The Minmatar are beholden to the Federation for a lot of support that they gave during the throw-off of the Amar yoke. But I suspect, but with these tensions going up, I think we're going to start seeing tensions as well. There's been some talk among some of the lore people that I know, not CCP, but speculation again, that we're going to start seeing four-way faction warfare, where the Gallente and Minmatar are going to split and the Caldari and Amar are going to split. So it's a four-way war, one against three, one against all the other three. So we'll see what happens with that. I think we're going to be seeing more of the Sisters of Eve. Although I should say that I was having a bit of a conversation with CCP Abraxas on Twitter, who told me that we aren't going to be seeing any more chronicles about the Sisters of Eve. But I think, especially with these new ships coming out and the heavy interest that they have both in the Eve Gate, which is, again, something that CCP wants to develop more, and Sleeper Space, I don't see how Sisters are not going to become more implicated, to be honest with you. So I think we're going to be seeing more sister ships. I also think that we're going to be seeing more of these terrestrial news items that I've been talking about. Knowing that underneath, however, there is more to tell here. Knowing that there are going to be, if you know where to look, if you know what to pay attention to, there is going to be more hidden beneath. So that's about the end of what I have to talk about here. I actually have no idea how much time I have left up here, so maybe we have time for questions. Thank you very much for having me. I hope you enjoyed my talk.
Thanks for the presentation.
Thanks for having me.
But clearly, as you know, Tybus Heath was framed. When are we going to see the reveal of the Gallente conspiracy?
Actually, if any of you are on Twitter, I will just add to that there is a Tybus Heath parody account who is absolutely hilarious. I will give a shout out to him. He does a good job of making you want to hate the Gallente. Tybus Heath he's an interesting character. He's centralized power like you've never seen before in the Caldari power structure, but he is also one of those, classic, oh, I'm dying off soon things. But also you're seeing, and then he got kicked out because he made some mistakes. People weren't too happy with him. So he's an interesting character, and we're going to see where CCP ends up taking him. I have absolutely no idea who kidnapped him, if he was even kidnapped. We didn't find a body, and so I won't believe he's dead until we see a body. But we'll see what happens with it. Another question?
Yeah, I'm Bajram Bali with Monkeys with Guns. I'm a little biased. I'm Gallente Militia. But in recent times, you're talking about how upcoming we could possibly see a four-way faction warfare. Well, right now, if you look at the kill boards and a little bit of player-driven content, the Minmatar are actually encroaching upon the Gallente faction warfare space, taking our LP and other things like that. We've started, my alliance in particular, and others have actually started shooting Minmatar on sight. Doesn't matter if they're blinky red or anything, we kill them. And also, we've been seeing a lot of Amar, especially with the recent Old Man Star, and even today, Lattice Steer pushes. We've been seeing I Whip My Slaves back and forth and other Amar groups. So, just saying.
It brings up an interesting point about kind of the parallelism. I'm willing to bet you didn't start blowing up Minmatar ships because you were upset with how the Minmatar were protesting in Federation space.
That's not true. I'm a bit of a lore junkie myself.
Okay.
So,
well, I'm glad to see that then. You're seeing that kind of player-driven interaction that I've been trying to play up here. It's a fantastic way. You see this back and forth between what CCP's storyline is doing and what players are actually doing in faction warfare. Faction warfare, for as much as some people proclaim that it's dead or stuck or whatever, is probably one of the closest things that you see to an active Eve storyline going with that ties in as much with the lore as you see with players. So I think faction warfare is fantastic, and I'm delighted that you guys are actually paying attention to the news items out there. You're seeing and mimicking what you're seeing in the news items and going off of it. I think that that's fantastic. So thank you. And long live the Federation.
For the Federation.
I guess I'll do another shout out to the Federation, go Gal Factional Warfare. But it often feels like it's sort of a one-way street. Because, I'm sure the Gallente and Caldari don't seem to have noticed the Battle of Asakai, and I'm sure Empress Jamil hasn't been briefed on the outcome of the Fountain War. Admittedly, I'm sure the Mittani doesn't even know who Empress Jamil is. But how can we make it so that the player history gets into the history of Eve alongside the lore? I mean, it sounds like we're already shooting the Minmatar, but how can we make that deeper?
Honestly, a lot of that comes down to what the lore team is able to do. As I said, they got hit somewhat badly after the reshuffling after the Summer of Rage in 2011. So they are a bit of a shrunken team right now, and it basically comes down to a lot of their capabilities. I would love to see less of that one way, and I think the player-driven storylines in terms of Eric Jalan are an attempt to move in that direction. But you're right, Empress Jamil doesn't seem to react at all to anything that happens in Nullsec. You don't see the Gallente or the Caldari caring at all that 4,000 ships got blown up in Asakai. I wish I had an answer for that, but it really comes down to the content is there. We just have to see what they do with it. So that's unfortunately the best I can give you.
Well, thanks for that.
Well, back before I was in Null, I was in LNA, and so I kind of have some preference to the Minotaur. But how do you think they'll write in all the cloaked, stabbed, farming LP guys? You know how FW has all the cloaked, stabbed guys. How do you think they'll write that in? Because FW is most of the lore kind of driver anyway. Mm-hmm. I mean, yeah, it is all Cardari. I'm not gonna lie, but yeah, how do you think they'll write that in? I mean.
So I can't really hear you very well up here. So.
Oh, I'm sorry. Here, I'm really loud too. Hold on. Okay, so the cloak stabbed guys that run around and farm the LP? Yeah, how do you think they'll write that in?
You know what? Again, it comes down to what CCP is willing to do. How much, I already hate the Caldari, so I'm happy to see any time that they get badmouthed in the news items. But cloak stabby guys that no one else seems to like, it ties in, but again, it comes down to what the CCP lore people end up putting in, unfortunately.
Oh, all right. Yeah, that's.
Am I not understanding your question?
No, that's pretty much what I was asking.
Okay.
All right, so you're talking about all of the back lore and all the things that happen, but the single person that most people are curious about is what the hell is the broker up to?
The broker, for those of you who may not know, showed up only in Empyrean Age as kind of he was similar to the Shadow Broker in the Mass Effect universe. He's everywhere. He knows everything. He was the one who sabotaged and crashed the Nyx into the station in Malkalin, which is, again, still on fire. I don't know why the Caldari don't have fire extinguishers or something like that. But the broker was supposed to be behind all these nefarious events that actually ended up starting faction warfare in general. It was the Nyx crashing into the station that was one of the key focal points in starting faction warfare from a lore perspective. I have absolutely no idea what the broker is up to these days. CCP seems to have dropped that storyline, along with the Jove a little bit. I meant to mention this in the speech. There seems to be certain storylines where CCP seems to realize that they kind of overreached a little bit in terms of the capabilities. You have the broker who seems to be doing everything, plotting, masterminding. He's the lore version of the Mittani in a lot of respects. He seems to be, people think he's everywhere at least. But you don't see him anymore, and you don't see the Jove anymore. CCP seems to have consciously dropped the Jove storyline because they realized that they made him too powerful. There's nothing they can't do, so what's the point of telling a story about them? So unfortunately, I think that that's the best answer that I can give you in terms of what happened to the broker. He seems to have been dropped. I could be wrong on that. Next book, whenever it comes out, might be like, surprise, you were wrong, and the dedication just be like, shut up, Mark 726. But we're not seeing a lot of his machinations, I don't think, these days. Especially not in the chronicles that they're putting out these days, especially not in the news items that I can tell. So we'll just have to see what happens with him. One of the many mysteries.
All right, thank you.
Do you have some suggestions on getting newbies hooked into the lore so that they can take that step from just shooting things that are read into actually being connected in with the universe?
Well, as I said in the speech, I think that the Sisters of Eve arc is a really great stepping stone. I think it's a great starting point. For those of you who, I'm sure all of you have at this point, but I'm going to say it anyway, who hasn't done the Sisters of Eve epic arc, it's meant to be done in T1 cruisers that you can fly, or T1 frigates that you can fly a few days after you join the game, after you finish the tutorial missions, and it specifically takes you to each of the 4 empires. It introduces you to a few characters from the 4 empires and gives you a feel of what each of the empires are all about. Oh, look, the Amar like God. Oh, look, the Keldari like their mega corporations. So building off of that storyline, and again, a revamp of the mission system would do another fantastic way of tying in the game and making them more lore presentable to people. It also needs to be easier to access. When I was researching when I was trying to put the lore guide together, the online version of it cross-links to, 50 different lore entries on the Wikipedia, 10 of the biggest chronicles out there, not to mention referencing books. It needs to be more concise. Well, not concise, not concise. But it needs to be more easily accessible in a lot of ways. And that's, I think, what they're trying to do, especially with this Eve source book, and especially with the Sisters of Eve storyline, as I said already. Anyone else? Well, it looks like I'm going to be the first presentation to end early here, so. Wait, hold on.
So some interesting ideas like people have been talking about in the past would be like if we could have faction warfare for any faction. Maybe we can join Sansa's Nation and help fight them during incursions. Maybe we can join Mordu's command and do whatever high-class mercenaries do. Or say even CCP could play as the Jovians and fart around as gods if they want to. But do you feel that if we as players had such an impact on the direction of the lore that we kind of might ruin it, or goons might interdict ice for all 4 empires at the same time?
It's admittedly a very tough line to walk. I will be the first to admit that, which is why I give the lore team as much credit as I do. They are, on the one hand, they have an idea of this storyline. They know what is out there. I'm sure somewhere there is an Eve lore Bible that just has all the answers that I was talking about here somewhere. If I could break into CCP headquarters next FanFest and steal it, I would be a very happy person. But on the other hand, they have to balance the fact that Eve guys are kind of dicks a lot of the time. We like to mess things up for the sake of messing things up.
Well, that's the other thing I was just going to say when I said about CCP taking the role of the Jovians. Say if something massive was to occur like that, then we could actually have the wrath of the developers come upon us and stop that in combat.
Well, that kind of ties back into what we were talking about earlier with the Empire's not really noticing what goes on in Nullsec. Maybe Jamil puts out a statement after the Battle of Asakai, or Heth had put out a statement when he was still in power. And again, it comes back to manpower.
Well, can I ask one question then for the group here?
Sure.
Would any of you guys be willing to pay $2, $3 more a month if CCP would hire people to play the game with you?
If we can still play with Plex, I think people will be happy. But
Well, it's already been tried.
But no, I mean, it's a resource issue. It always is a resource issue. I get that the role players, the lore hounds like you and me, are not necessarily the most vocal. We are not necessarily the majority here. I know people a lot of people have a general interest in the storyline, but there's not going to be a ton of people who really dive into it, unfortunately. And it comes down to a matter of resource allocation.
Okay.
I'd love to see it. I would be the first in line praising CCP for that decision, but you have to follow the dollars, I guess.
Well, I've been in Wormhole and for a long time, and when I first moved in, I did actually take a bit of notice and was curious about those oddities you were talking about, telecon objects with these sleepers and all these things. But I have to admit, after years out there, it just doesn't faze me anymore, and I kind of haven't even thought about it in a while. You want to maybe throw out a stab at just where you think it might be going or how it could all be tied together?
More wild speculation on my part. Is that where you're going for?
Why not?
Everyone seems to have their own pet theory of where the sleepers are going to go. I get your frustration with the lack of movement on the sleeper storyline. I suspect, and again, wild speculation on my part, the people who put that storyline together, I think may have thought that we would have put it together a little bit quicker. Going back to that quote that I had from CCP Drop Bear, it may not make sense at first is one of the key quotes there. And he's told us over and over again that someone just needs to put it all together. What that means, I couldn't possibly tell you. There does seem to be some sort of virus or some sort of disease of some kind that, and perhaps that's why they ran away from K-space. They were originally out of the Ani constellation, Minmatar space is where the sleepers originally settled. But this disease seems to have popped up, and I don't know if it was because of the disease that they ran to wormhole space, or if they ran to wormhole space and ran to the disease. I don't know. What the Telecan have to do with it, I have absolutely no idea. But as far as wild speculation, I guess, I think the Telecan, one of my preferred theories is that the Telecan got sick. Telecan are one of the ancient races of Eve. Sleepers are the most well-known of those, but there are a few others out there that haven't been nearly as well developed. I think the Telecan ended up bringing the disease in, and for whatever reason, the sleepers were working together with them and trying to fight it, which is why you see they're primarily sleeper sites with what seems to be Telecan structures just kind of plastered on top of them.
Yeah, the big mobile bases in the middle of the anoms and things like that.
Exactly. So I think that it was an attempt for the Telecan to help, or the sleepers to help the Telecan. Maybe if we pool our resources together, we can understand this a little bit better. But as I said, I just don't know. Maybe it's the other way around.
Wormholers need to pool our resources and figure it out. Long live the Federation.
A lot of Galente fans, I like that.
Hi, my big question was, what's your opinion on including player-created lore into the official canon? I'm part of a big RP core out in the Intaki Placid region, and we're just wondering when separate factions and that kind of thing can finally be included.
First off, I will start by saying I love what the Intaki do. They are one of the best developed bloodlines in EVE because of what the Intaki role players do with it. I love the Intaki. I rolled an Intaki character, not that I knew the background of it when I formed him, but I love what the Intaki have done. In terms of bringing in player-written content into the official lore, I know CCP isn't the only IP holder that is very, very hesitant to do that, unfortunately. A lot of people don't want to lose that much control of the story, and then, of course, obviously, they wouldn't be letting all of the lore, the outside lore into the game, but then you run into CCP favoritism. Oh, they chose my chronicle, but not theirs, what the heck? So I doubt it will happen, which is a shame because there is some fantastic stuff out there, but I do doubt that it's going to happen just because that is possibly a step too far. It does go back to the guy's question from earlier in terms of having that kind of more back and forth a little bit. That would be an excellent way to get involved, but losing control of the IP like that is probably not where CCP wants to go.
Yeah, it's just when they were doing faction warfare in the very beginning, we were asked to choose what side we wanted to be on, and when we tried to make our own faction, they kind of said, no, we don't really want to do that.
CCP does what CCP does. What can I say here?
Yeah, thanks.
you've taken this farther down the rabbit hole than I even knew existed. Thank you. I'm a nullsec PvPer. I've learned more from a couple of you guys about faction warfare, about lore this weekend than I've known since 2007 when I started playing. I listened yesterday in a keynote address about player-driven sandbox. I hear it all the time. We've all heard it. That's why we love EVE. You're talking about resources maybe limiting the amount of lore that's coming out. Why not a bunch of you guys, because you're different than I am as a player, and you're very valuable to the community. Why don't you propose a council that would help, that would kind of maybe voluntarily help fill that resource gap in some way?
Well, I should have mentioned this. Actually, I forgot to put it in here. CCP does have one of the branches of the ISD program, Interstellar Services Department. The ISD are player volunteers. One of the branches of the ISD Mercury, I believe it's called, is very much doing that kind of thing. Very much behind the scenes. They don't get out much. CCP might lock them away in the captain's quarters and just make them write. I don't really know. But they're the ones actually who I understand are very heavily involved with the wiki rewrite that I was talking about.
Okay, cool.
So there is a place, if you have the time. I wish I did. I've spent hours debating if I want to really apply to ISD Mercury and see what I can do for them. Unfortunately, real life gets in the way as it does so often, and I just realized I don't have the time for it.
Agreed, but you wouldn't be taking that all on your shoulders. There's thousands of people that probably have the same interests that you do in the game. I'm just inviting you to look farther into that because you've already got it on the ball.
Well, I appreciate that. I will take that into account next time I'm staring at the apply screen again, which happens every few months.
How's it going? Good presentation, by the way. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Moving into the sort of crazy player theory, some of my friends and I had a theory about the sisters, and obviously run by you because you've done a lot more research, that the sisters are actually working for the sleepers in a sense. They're looking for a cure to what the sleepers have. And they're benefiting, we're all benefiting in game theory from all their medical research, but their long end goal is to find a cure for the sleeper's disease. And that's why one of the reasons that when the sister ships come out, they're so geared toward getting a sister's presence out in those wormholes and getting more stuff out there. They want to find the cure for that. Do you think there's any merit to that, or am I way off crazy?
Well, it's not the weirdest theory that I've heard, and there's a good deal of support for that. The sisters have long shown an interest. They're most well known for heavily researching the Eve Gate. That's kind of their thing. But they also have shown, this is now the third ship coming out of the sisters program. They gave one of the gifts that they gave out, I think it was the Zephyr, that they were the ones who put out the Zephyr, and it was specifically designed for wormhole research. It unfortunately doesn't fit guns, but it's designed so that if you fly into any wormhole site, the sleepers will not attack you. Players still will, which is why you never see it, and they get blown up immediately on undock. But they were designed possibly to kind of go along this route of CCP giving us some tools to go explore this storyline without fear of sleeper reprisal. So the fact that first off we had that ship earlier, we now have two ships coming out there very much dedicated to exploration, both in K-space but especially in wormhole space, that's a fairly plausible theory. You don't see a lot of support for it in the game canon per se. You know that the sleeper or the sisters work a little bit with the syndicate, but you don't see a lot of them behind the scenes in terms of the chronicles that we've seen. However, their actions do speak louder than words sometimes, so the fact that we have 3 wormhole dedicated ships here, plausible theory.
Thank you.
Just one note. If you want to know what happened to the broker, it's all covered in Empyrean Age.
Say that again?
What happens to the broker is covered in Empyrean Age. It's kind of the main plot in it.
It's been a while. It has been a long time since I've read that book, actually, so I really should have reread it for this.
Hope there's no problem for seconds. First off, I have a statement. With players and creating player-created lore, I shoot the goons all the time, but I have to give them credit, especially with like Burn Jitta. They took the time, they organized. They should at least get some credit with that somewheres in the lore, because it did disrupt trade. I mean, in a huge way. And if there's any players out there that want to go out there and create the content, take the time and do it, I think they should get some form of credit, because they're creating content for all of us. I mean, we all do live in the same world. I just wanted to say that. And also, I have a question. I got a buddy who's way into the lore. He's with the dev actors and does all that sort of stuff. And he's told me in prior that the sleepers originated from the Jovians.
Yes.
And they both share the same disease. And maybe it's just crazy that I think that maybe these quarantine sites are to try to combat or quarantine the Jovian disease. Because I mean, the sleepers try to live in that alternative world so that they don't fall susceptible to the disease.
That one, I'm not sure I agree with that. Templar 1, I don't know if your friend has read that, dives a lot into the background of the sleepers. Spoiler alert for any of you who don't want to know how it ends. Your friend is right that the sleepers and the Jove are related. They were. Their history dates back to the original coming in through the Eve Gate. We don't know their history before they came in through the Eve Gate, but the Jove and what became the Sleepers ultimately came in 3 massive motherships through the Eve Gate. Most of the people on those ships were in cryostasis. In order to make sure that they didn't go crazy, I guess, they created an artificial construct for people to mingle in and talk with each other through computers.
Right,
the people who stayed asleep became the sleepers.
Right, and that's just the world that they choose to live in. I know
Correct.
that they can wake up, but they choose to live in that because it's a happier world.
Absolutely. They've stayed in there for 20,000 years or 16,000 years at this point. However, the Jovian disease doesn't start popping up for the Jove until after that event. It's after they settle firmly in New Eden and they're tinkering a lot more with the genetics of humanity that the Jovian disease pops up. Beyond that, it's been stated explicitly numerous times that the Jovian disease is genetic in nature. It's not communicable, so there'd be no need for quarantine sites. The Jovian disease is, the Jovian tinkered around a lot in genetics, and they eventually started playing around with the stuff that gives us emotion, trying to eradicate negative emotion. What that resulted in, according to the Eve lore, is the Jovian disease ultimately implements itself as a complete loss of will to live. They become catatonic and they don't do anything. And so eventually, once this hits on them, they die off because they don't eat, they don't sleep, they don't do anything, they just sit there. So as far as that theory goes, I don't really buy it just because how explicit CCP seems to have been that this isn't a communicable disease. You're not going to catch it by going to Jove space.
Okay. Thank you for the answer. I wasn't sure of the exact timeline of when the sleepers actually split off from the Jovians, so I thought that maybe they were of the same race. So
they are of the same race. They came together. They did come together through the Eve Gate. It's just that they seem to like living in the Matrix a lot more than real life, and I guess I can't blame them for that. And that's why we play Eve. It's a Matrix of our own. Anything else? And I'm being told that time is up, so thanks for having me, guys.